morning, members. I suppose I should use the microphone. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting of the Environment, Natural Resources Policy and Finance Committee to order. First is the approval of the minutes before you for March 6th. Representative Sundin, would you move those minutes, please?
Certainly, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. The minutes are approved. I have to start out by congratulating Senator Ingebrigtsen and Representative Franson. They beat, Alexandria beat my Thief River Falls Prowlers last night. I anticipate I'll be wearing a Alexandria Cardinals hockey jersey sometime in the future for a while. So with that, we have before us today House File 3280, and I'd like to move that to re-refer the bill to GovOps. So with that, Representative Lueck is here, chief author of the bill. I apologize for the late start today, although there were a number of members that were not in their seat. I see Representative Clark Johnson is looking at his watch. We have a long list of testifiers as well today. You have the bill overview in your packets. Representative Lueck, would you explain your bill, please? And then after that, we'll go to the amendment.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. First, what this bill deals with is the numeric sulfate standard, but what I would like to do, I've got a author's amendment, but to make sure we understand that this is a bipartisan effort here, I would like to provide, got the right volume?
Thank you. Good job, Anna.
I would like to have Representative Metsa offer the A5 amendment to put it in shape so we've got the entire thing in front of the committee.
Okay, Representative Metsa to the A5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Essentially, A5 is a work in progress. It appropriates $50,000 to work with the DNR, our tribal communities, and other stakeholders that have been working on the natural wild rice issue. We would like to see some forward-moving momentum in things like restoration projects, in things like adjusting dam levels, and other solutions that we know will help increase the harvestability. This has been a hard amendment to work on over the last few days. We've got a few things that still need some work. Sounds like the DNR might need a little bit more time, and getting to 2020 instead of 2019 in line 1.13. And those are things we can work on as we're moving forward. And I think that the dollar amount is a good starting place, but we'll have to work towards getting them a little bit more appropriate funding to do a realistic and complete study by that time. And so essentially this work group would come back with some recommendations in regard to other alternatives to grow natural wild rice and help in a way that the sulfate standard currently is not. So with that, I would stand for any committee questions on the A5 amendment.
Yep, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Metsa. On the 50,000, it seems a little, after being around here for a while, I don't know if we do anything for 50,000 anymore for studies, but it seems like 500,000 is more realistic in terms of comprehension. And I'm just wondering if also the source of the funds, if you are wedded to that account, or if there's other possibilities that may, how flexible you are on both the amount and the account.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Hansen. I agree. I think the starting or 500,000 would be an adequate amount for them to get, and I am not beholden to it coming out of the Heritage Enhancement account. I'd prefer general fund dollars, however, there aren't targets at this time, and so I'll work towards that effect as this bill moves forward.
Yeah,
Representative Hanson.
and good, Mr.
Go
Chair.
ahead, Representative Lueck.
This is, essentially, this is an author's amendment, so let's make this clear. This is an author's amendment, but again, I want to make sure you understand, this is a bipartisan effort here to shift the focus onto really restoring and protecting wild rice. And at this point, we all understand there are no targets. The dollar amount involved in this amendment may or may not be adequate. We do know the money exists there, and it would be appropriate use to start there. So obviously, we'll be discussing dollar amounts all the way up to when the governor signs the bill.
Thank you. Representative Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and could you remind me what the path is for this bill after, is it going to leave here today, and then if it leaves here today, where does it go?
My plan for this is to send it to GovOps, re-referred to GovOps.
And Mr. Chair, just to respond to Representative Lueck, we are the Finance Committee, so this is the question that, needs to be asked here, regardless of what the content of the bill is. And so if it is going to pass out, I want on the record that the 50K is inadequate to do the complete amount, and we're going to have to look at where the source comes from. It'll end up in Ways and Means at some point. I'm not on that, so that's the reason for asking the question right now.
Thank you. And Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would echo what Representative Hanson just spoke to. I mean, $50,000 is not very much money at all to do anything. And given the rather effusive language in Section 2 of the bill itself, as far as the unique importance of wild rice, I would really hope that Representative Lueck and, that everyone involved would try to get that number quite a bit higher. Because if we're all going to walk around talking about caring about wild rice, which we should, it's incredibly unique to Minnesota. We've got to get that number higher. You're not going to be able to accomplish anything, no matter what your stated intentions are. So I think I would just really encourage you to get that number higher, because we're not going to be able to do very much, and it really kind of undermines the Section 2 findings about the importance of wild rice to not put the dollars there to back that up. So I would encourage you to get that higher sooner than later. Thanks.
Thank you. And I would remind members that what we're asking for with the 50K is a report. Okay? That's what the 50K is for, right? Thank you. Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a word of thanks to the author of the amendment here and having it accepted by the principal author. A word of thanks for recognizing the importance of tribal input on your working group here. I hope it becomes productive, and I hope you're very sincere about input from the tribes. It's very important in my neck of the woods. Thank you.
Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Sundin, we've worked hard. Representative Ekelund and I met with the tribal governments, I think in November, early December-ish, and did listen, heard the concerns, and do plan on continuing to work with them and get this amendment into the shape that works to actually do what we anticipate that it will do, which is have a good plan presented to both their tribal governments and to our committees so that we can work on things that actually help with the restoration and or reseeding, adjusting dam levels, things like that, so that we're actually working towards a meaningful solution into the future. And I'm committed to that.
Thank you. Anything else on the A5? Okay, with that, all those in favor of the A5 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? A5 is adopted. Okay, Representative Lueck, we have the bill in the order and the shape that you would like. Two-year bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'd like to do is just run over the general points of this bill, and then we've got a huge number of testifiers with a variety of perspectives on what we're trying to do here. The important thing here is that we're going to replace an obsolete numeric-based sulfate standard with a narrative standard, and I want to repeat that again. We're simply going to make an adjustment to a standard. We're not going to eliminate anything relative to protecting wild rice beds and ensure they're not impaired or degraded, and in fact move in the other direction and begin a legitimate restoring process. The numeric standard's been around for over 8 years. The attempt to fix that standard has been around for 8 years. It was adopted in 1973 based on 1944 observations, and since 1973 it's never been enforced. And currently in a long-term attempt by MPCA to adjust that numeric standard got snarled up in administrative law court and was rejected. So the bottom line is here we're trying to move in a direction where we know we can make a difference on improving wild rice. I'll run briefly through the elements of the bill. Page 1 and the top of page 2, there's basically no change there to direction that was provided to MPCA. And I see Representative Moline is in the audience. Some of that language she crafted a number of years ago. What it does do, though, is remove the deadline for rulemaking in that area. Section 2 deals with the findings and just lays out, one, where we're at and where we need to go. And it's pretty straightforward. We need to focus on the narrative standard, which is not unlike how we deal with wetland issues. We basically have told ourselves, federal government, state government, that we're going to protect our wetlands. And so that's what a narrative standard is about now. There ends up being numbers underneath a standard eventually, but at this point, we really need to move on that narrative basis, and that is we're going to protect what we have and restore where appropriate in the wild rice area. So those findings outline history, they outline where we go, and go into some detail. They also outline the harm that this obsolete standard would do if we did begin to truly enforce it. And when I say harm, we've got a lot of testifiers came a long ways to describe the impact that obsolete standard would have if that in fact was enforced. Sections 5, 6, 7, and 8 talk about direction to MPCA as to what we do currently. And then the new element that we added is basically a starting point to move us down the road on that narrative standard. And I want to hold up, got it in a 3-ring binder. In 2008, we did a 117-page study on what we really should be doing relative to wild rice. And basically, it's the blueprint that this working group can start with. So there's a huge amount of work already been done. There's 6 major findings in that study from 2008 that really chart the path. So they start halfway down the racetrack on this when we talk about this working group that we want to reconstitute with the, within the DNR, including tribal governments and other experts. So that's the long and short on the bill. We want to move from a numeric standard to a narrative standard. That's frankly not a big deal. We've basically got a narrative standard that covers one of the most complex things we deal with in this committee and throughout the state, and that's the wetland, way we protect wetlands. And the important part is this very last amendment, that piece that makes sure we get everybody involved that has a piece of this, and that is obviously the state of Minnesota. That's our tribal governments, and we've got a lot of experts on the private sector that we can bring to bear and get that knowledge working on how we protect and improve our natural wild race body. So with that, Mr. Chair, what I'd like to make sure we allow plenty of time here, because we have got a lot of people that have came forward here from all over the state that have got a story to tell about why we should be doing this. So that's it, Mr. Chair. Stand for questions. Would like to see us make sure we do maximum time for testifiers.
Thank you, appreciate that. So first on the list, Steve Georgie, and I apologize if I've gotten your name wrong. Would you come down along with Rick Crum? And thank you for being here. And Mr., is it?
Georgie, yes.
Georgie, okay. And I got to tell you, you have a special place in my heart. You're representing the Rams. I'm a Rosa Ram, so. If you could try to limit your testimony to about 3 minutes, please. I think that with the list that we have, we would like to get through that. So identify yourself for the records and proceed with your testimony, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Steve Georgie. I serve as the Executive Director of RAMS, the Range Association of Municipalities and Schools. Our board is comprised of 22 elected public officials from either a school district, a township board, or a city council, along with 2 school superintendents from districts within the boundaries of the Taconite Assistance Area of northeastern Minnesota. Our organization represents more than 75,000 residents, 51 public sector units of government, including 24 cities, 16 public school districts, and 11 townships in the 13,000 square mile Taconite Assistance Area of northeastern Minnesota. As an organization, RAMS has represented the interest of our Iron Range for over 75 years. The information that I've submitted is taken directly from the administrative law judge's report on the proposed MPCA change to the current wild rice sulfate standard of 10 milligrams per liter. The numbers associated with the statement I provided represent the actual paragraph numbers from the report. As RAMS and many of our member organizations testified at the public hearing in Virginia, the unknown economic impact to our region is a major concern with the proposed new rule by the MPCA, and this concern was confirmed by Judge Slaughter in her ruling. RAMS, along with many member communities, are on record with Commissioner Linkstein raising the concern that public hearings on the new rule were to be conducted prior to the report on viable treatment methods and estimated costs for implementing those new treatment methods. That report is actually due at the end of May this year. With 13 communities from northern Minnesota on the list of the MPCA's wild rice waters, the potential cost of new reverse osmosis treatment installations could easily exceed $100 million. I offer the following statements taken from Judge Slaughter's report. I'm going to turn over to the second side. The proposed amendments would establish an equation to determine the protective level of sulfate in each wild rice water based on the concentration of iron and organic carbon in the sediment. The administrative law judge disapproves the proposed equation-based sulfate standard at Min R 705.0.0224 because the proposed rule fails to meet the definition of a rule under Minnesota Statute 1438 and Minnesota 14.2100. In addition, the proposed equation-based sulfate standard is not rationally related to the agency's objectives in this proceeding and is unconstitutionally void for vagueness. Put on to paragraph 57, the agency's predictions about the number of dischargers likely to be affected is unreliable because several factors will affect the facility's potential to impact the wild rice water, and those factors cannot be determined in advance of establishing the numeric sulfate standard and evaluating the specific circumstances associated with each discharge in each wild rice water. Paragraph 78, because the agency has not sampled the affected waters before proposing the rules, it cannot state with what the standard will be for any given discharger, or whether the discharger's effluent will exceed a new standard, and what treatment may be needed to meet the standard once it is ascertained. 79, regulated parties predict extremely large costs for wastewater sulfate treatment and express frustration at the lack of specific information which would allow them to accurately predict and plan for water treatment requirements or variance requests. 80, the administrative law judge concludes the agency's decision to promulgate this rule without defining a standard applicable to each regulated wild rice water undermines many of the potential benefits the rule could provide to wastewater treatment owners and operators, including improvements in their ability to plan, certainty about regulated waters, and efficiency in the regulated environment. In this rulemaking, the agency is proposing to identify approximately 1,300 waters as wild rice waters. While the agency expects that these waters make up most of the wild rice waters in Minnesota, it expects it will need to amend the rule within 3 years to add newly identified wild rice waters. The MPCA was unable to estimate the costs for establishing a site-specific standard, except to state that they will be highly variable. In addition to the cost of sediment sampling and possible pore water sampling, there will be other costs unique to the situation. It is likely that more extensive sampling and analysis will be needed, and additional costs will be incurred to determine the factors affecting the wild rice beneficial use in that water body. Another situation that could result in costs to MnDOT will arise if MnDOT conducts road construction in an area of high sulfate rock, resulting in increased sulfate stormwater runoff to nearby regulated wild rice waters. That just happened on Highway 169 to Ely. The agency acknowledged in 103, the agency acknowledged that employment is particularly a key issue for the mining economy in Minnesota's Iron Range, but it is unable to predict whether the consequences of adopting the proposed rule will be as minor as a small increase in the price of the product, or may be as extensive as the consequences to an entire community when a company ceases operation. This is the lifeblood of the Iron Range, and we don't know if they're going to exist after this rule. 129, the MPCA acknowledges that treatment for sulfate can be extremely expensive. According to the MPCA, reverse osmosis, RO, membrane filtration is the most practical sulfate treatment technology currently available for removing sulfate from wastewater discharges. 130, the MPCA states that treating municipal wastewater using RO followed by evaporation and crystallization is likely to have high capital costs associated with sulfate polishing costs that are above the cost of conventional wastewater treatment plants. So there's significant costs involved in that whole RO process. 131, the MPCA acknowledges that the combinations of these secondary considerations could prove prohibitively burdensome for affected communities. With respect to taconite mine dischargers, the MP states that it's impossible to estimate the cost for treatment of taconite mine wastewater with a high degree of certainty, as it will vary depending on the volume, concentration, level of treatment, and processed use. Pretty hard to run a business when you don't know what's going to cost to do so. 138, State Representative Mike Sundin, Minnesota House District 11A, echoed the Western Lakes Superior Sanitary District's concern that implementation of reverse osmosis treatment could require a $500 million investment, resulting in residential sewer bills increasing upwards of 5 times. We did a similar study in the city of Hoyt Lakes. It's only a little over 500,000 gallons a day discharge. SEH Engineering estimated between $6 and $8 million to add an RO treatment system to their wastewater, and they are on the wild rice water list. The administrative law judge concludes that the MPCA has attempted to engage in the analysis required by Min Statute 14-131. but that the record does not support an adequate analysis. Chairman Famian and members of the committee, Rams wholeheartedly agrees with Judge Schlatter. The proposed equation-based formula for a new variable wild rice standard has been poorly formulated, provides no guarantee of wild rice growth or enhanced growth, and is most likely to cost billions of dollars in unproven treatment system modifications that will create economic despair for most of the 50-plus communities on the current list. For certain, the 13 communities on the list from northeastern Minnesota would be crippled with the new mercury mitigation requirements on top of this proposed standard. We ask you please repeal this standard and make us the 50th state in the union that has found no need for a wild rice sulfate standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Crum, could you identify yourself for the record, who you represent? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, representatives. My name is Richard Crum. I work with NTS, which is a small environmental consulting and engineering company in Virginia, Minnesota. We have more than 30 years of experience working with both the industrial dischargers and municipal dischargers, and have ecologists that have spent a lot of time doing rice restoration in both the U.S. and Canada. My testimony this morning, though, I want to focus just on the view from the wastewater treatment operators across the Iron Range. And I think in your packet there's a handout that was prepared and signed by a number of operators across the Iron Range previously for the ALJ. There's a couple points about the operators. Those are the folks that are on the ground that make whatever collection and treatment systems that are in place actually work to meet their standards, comply with their permits, and protect the environment. They spend a lot of time looking at what it costs to operate their facilities. Those costs generally fall into two categories. One of them is long-term replacement costs to keep what they have working, and the other one is upgrades. Usually those upgrades are to meet new standards, or in this case, the enforcement of a standard that has not been enforced previously. So long-term maintenance alone is a real challenge. I think we all know about, and we hear about, and probably sometimes deal with in these communities, the challenge of replacing that aging infrastructure. A lot of us hear about it, but the operators actually deal with it. They deal with it through increased flow, malfunctioning pumps and collection system, malfunctioning equipment in the treatment plants. All those things create barriers to their overall efforts to meet those discharge standards. So given those costs, when a new regulation or perhaps enforcement of an existing standard that hasn't been enforced comes along, it's entirely appropriate to scrutinize those costs, those future costs, and the benefits that you would gain out of those versus spending the money somewhere else. The scrutiny really, in this case, should consider the science underlying the rule. In general, there should be a history of repeatability and experiments and a broad peer review and agreement and interpretation of the results. The environmental benefits should be clear and directly related to that science, and the applicability of the rule should be very clear to allow the compliance costs to be estimated. The October 20th memo, which I think is in your materials, signed by many of the operators, represents that scrutiny. That's really what that memo was about. And it represented their correspondence back to their city governments. In other words, their recommendation to their city governments. And I think it also supports House File 3280. Call your attention to Section 3 in that document, which identifies 6 points with respect to the science that was incorporated into the disapproved rule. In general, these points bring out, number one, sulfate does not have a direct toxicological effect on wild rice. Number two, there's great uncertainty in the concentration of the sulfide that does. Number three, there are multiple stressors for wild rice that have not been adequately considered. And number three, there is research out there that has not been considered, and broad peer review and agreement about the role of sulfate and sulfide in the occurrence, density, and quality of the wild rice has not necessarily been reached. It is my opinion that and this oftentimes happens in these complicated endeavors, we tend to get lost in the weeds of the details, which make good scientific questions, but do not necessarily lead to a viable understanding of real-world protection of wild rice. Just to illustrate that, some of our colleagues have been working on wild rice restoration in lakes in Canada and concentrate on stressors such as the competing vegetation and water levels, and have had great success throughout mostly the province of Ontario. They rarely even measure the pore water sulphate or sulfide, but yet achieve that same success. And I think in the testimony that was provided to the ALJ previously, on some of the details of that work in Canada were provided. My conclusion is that neither the equation-based standard, which was disallowed by the ALJ, nor the 10 milligram per liter standard can be shown to be protective of wild rice. So allowing either to be in rule creates that uncertainty that takes away from spending on real problems. House File 3280 would eliminate the period of uncertainty for municipalities, allow for better planning for infrastructure replacement and upgrade costs to maximize the protection of the environment for the dollar. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the testifiers? Thank you, gentlemen. Next, Mr. Quillis and Carly Moline, welcome back.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer.
I was just going to suggest that.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you for having me here today. I'm Carly Moline. I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota State Building and Construction Trades. Many of you remember me from my former life as a legislator from the Iron Range. And I feel like figuring out the rulemaking for the wild rice sulphate standard is kind of the song that never ends. It's one of the first issues I worked on when I started in 2011, and one of the last issues I was working on as I left in 2016. Obviously, my work wasn't complete or wasn't adequate, so I'm thankful that Representative Lueck and Metza are here to finish this business that is so important to the state. Again, I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota State Building and Construction Trades Council and our affiliate unions, which represent 70,000 members statewide. The reason that this is important to us is enforcement of this formula, of this standard, will have a significant impact on industry, which of course will have a significant impact on the jobs of our members. As the ALJ judge found, which Mr. Georgie had gone through some of those findings, the new formula was poorly formulated, and there's simply no guarantee that it's going to enhance or protect wild rice. What it will guarantee is a significant impact on jobs, families, and communities. Through industry, through wastewater treatment plants, will have an impact on our municipalities, as well as trades jobs. Representative Lueck's bill also provides a more transparent process for rulemaking than that which could be the process under the court's order should the MPCA propose an alternative formula or rule to the ALJ judge, and because of that, we think that this is an important piece that will provide a more transparent process for the public. Again, on behalf of the Building Trades Council, we would ask for members' support of this legislation.
Thank you, Representative Moline. I have a hard time calling you executive director. Good job. Mr. Quillis, proceed.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tony Quillis. I'm the Director of Environmental Policy at the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and I will be brief. I know you have a long list of testifiers, Mr. Chairman. But, Mr. Chairman, this is an important issue to our members as we've been engaged in commenting on this, as you have heard, for over 8+ years. And you've heard me say from this chair many times that environmental permitting, environmental review, and rulemaking are of concern to our members for three reasons: the time, the cost, and the uncertainty. And the rulemaking that we've gone through on this hits on a number of those. First, the current proposal we think is fraught with uncertainty surrounding the application and implementation of this rule. And while the PCA has suggested the uncertainties can be addressed through variance and compliance agreements, there are still numerous questions about the scope and terms of both of these tools. Additionally, as you've heard from Mr. Georgie and others, compliance, the cost of compliance is a major concern to us. Many of the affected entities will have to spend millions of dollars to comply with this new proposed regulation. The Chamber is particularly concerned that the rulemaking proceeded before an important economic impact study was completed. In 2016, the legislature required the PCA to issue requests for proposals for an engineering feasibility and cost analysis of the potential impacts of any new rule. Then in 2017, just last session, the legislature extended that deadline for completing the rulemaking from January of 2018 to January 2019, specifically to allow the engineering feasibility and cost analysis to be included in the supporting documents for the rulemaking. While the technical support documents and the Statement of Need and Reasonableness, or the SONAR, do include socioeconomic and economic impacts, they don't include all the factors that would be assembled in a complete cost analysis of the proposed rule. The Chamber believes the rulemaking should have not have proceeded until the necessary cost analysis was completed, and especially in light of the fact of the analysis, as Mr. Georgie pointed out, that study was supposed to be due in May of this year. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the PCA has estimated that 130 permitted facilities will be evaluated for whether or not they require additional permit limits to protect wild rice under the new rule. Without understanding the feasibility and the cost of meeting these new requirements, it's difficult for these 130 facilities to plan for future economic development projects and commit capital investment to their facilities. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time. I know you've got a long list and willing to stick around for questions.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it sounds like the Chamber's actually saying wait until the study is done, but that wasn't my question. My question is, and it's for Representative Moline and Mr. Quillis, do tribal governments have the authority to set their own wild rice or sulfate standards?
To the testifiers. Phone a friend?
I'm leaning over to look at Ms. Taylor.
Ms. Taylor.
Mr. Chair, members, I would have to get back to the committee on the details of that.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think that's an important question because then what we do here as a legislature can be different than what the tribal governments can do and what they have the ability to do. And so, I think that the search for science and the study helps everybody with a result, whether they're state government, federal government, or tribal government. So that, I don't know if maybe Representative Becker-Finn has an answer to that, but I think that's an important question in context to the whole discussion here.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just remind the committee that the federal treaties are the supreme law of the land. And whether folks like that or not, that is our law in the United States. So that's, you can take that for what it is, but they are the supreme law of the land. That's reality.
Anything else? Okay, next, Kelsey Johnson, please.
Morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Kelsey Johnson. I'm president of the Iron Mining Association. Thank you for this opportunity to share the important perspective of the Iron Mining Association and our members with you today on House File 3280. The IMA represents 6 operating iron mining facilities and 2 idled facilities that span the Iron Range, and 175 vendor members located throughout Minnesota and North America. Combined, our industry supports 15,000 employees. Minnesota's iron mines contribute over 85% of the nation's domestic iron production. There's only one other state in the nation where iron mining occurs, and that's in Michigan. Not only is iron mining's impact felt in northern Minnesota on a daily basis, but our industry plays a key role in the nation's economic health and vitality. According to a recent study, our industry supports nearly 11 million jobs nationwide and 16% of the GDP. Our industry has played a role in our state and nation's economy for more than 130 years. Our industry is key to the long-term success and vitality of the communities on the Iron Range and in communities throughout the United States. For the past 40 years, the iron mining industry has worked in partnership with state agencies to enhance environmental health. Environmental stewardship is a core value of our association and our members. For the last 8 years, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has been evaluating and crafting a sulfate rule to address a water quality standard. The current sulfate rule is one of a kind. No other state or nation in North America has a rule like this. And while it is unique, it is outdated. As our technology and scientific measurements have evolved, so has our ability to find the culprits that actually affect the growth of wild rice. And it's been made clear that sulfate is not the culprit. The most recent rulemaking process allowed for a revealing and robust comment period. More than 4,500 comments were submitted, and more than 275 participated in the administrative hearings throughout the state. We believe that it is time for the legislature to weigh in on this rule. On October 23rd, as a sign of support, there was a rally that brought together hundreds of people throughout the range, including communities, cities, schools, unions, businesses, and industry, gathered to ask the MPCA to reverse course on their rulemaking. The comment period closed just before the start of session, and the MPCA has indicated that their intention is to fix the proposed standard and resubmit to the Chief Administrative Law Judge on March 15th, shortly before legislative deadlines. This is deeply concerning because the response and finalization of the rule may occur outside of the legislative session. It is our belief that the legislature must give clear direction to the agency regarding this rule, which was adopted without legislative approval in 1973. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Very good. Excuse me, next we have Larry Sutherland and Chrissy Ivanovich.
Morning,
Good
Mr.
morning.
Chair. and
Would you
members of the
identify
committee.
yourselves for the record and who you represent and proceed with your testimony, please?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Larry Sutherland. I'm the General Manager of United States Steel's Minnesota ore operations. Minnesota ore is made up of the Mintac facility in Mountain Iron, Minnesota, the largest taconite plant in North America, and the Keetac facility in Keewatin, Minnesota. We control about 23 million net tons of iron ore units that goes primarily into our own North America flat roll blast furnaces for our hot metal production. I have over 40 years of experience in iron mining, having worked my way from a millwright position to my current position as general manager of our Minnesota ore operations. As general manager, I'm responsible not only for the operation of our facilities, but for the nearly 2,000 jobs of our employees and what those jobs mean for their families and our communities on the Iron Range. The American steel industry has been hit hard by unfair trade practices. I think you could pick the paper up every day and see a story about what's going on with the import legislation, et cetera, throughout our country. As a result of this, many of our iron mining facilities have been idled, including the Mintac and Keetac facilities at different points in their recent business history here. Most recently, our Keetac facility was fully idled from April of 2015 until February of 2017. Approximately 22 months of idling for that facility where our employees were laid off primarily. Keetac could only restart because of that great workforce and the competitive cost structure of that facility. Our company understands protecting the environment is the right thing to do, and we have spent over $100 million in the last decade on environmental compliance at our Minnesota ore operations. However, we need to spend our limited capital on issues that will clearly result in an environmental benefit. Unfortunately, the proposed sulfate rule does not do that. MPCA claims its rule provides certainty, but then go on to say they cannot tell what the impact of the rule is going to be on wild rice or the discharges. How can the MPCA expect companies and cities to move forward with compliance when the agency cannot even say with certainty that the rice will be protected? A rule needs to have a proven benefit. This rule clearly does not. U.S. Steel is committed to preserving the environment, but for us to be able to continue operating our facilities and employing our workers, we need to spend our limited capital resources wisely. For a rule to require significant investment without having a proven benefit makes no sense. Accordingly, U.S. Steel supports HF 3280 by Representative Lueck and the repeal of the existing 10 milligram per liter sulfate standard. Just yesterday, I'd like to note our executive team, including our CEO and President of United States Steel Corporation, visited our iron mining facilities in northern Minnesota. They gave the Keetac facility, which, as I stated, was idle for almost 22 months, was awarded the CEO Safety Cup. That's an annual award that is given to one of the U.S. Steel facilities. That includes our tubular operations. It includes our European operations. The Keetac facility was awarded that yesterday by our CEO for the work that's been done on safety at that facility. And I can tell you, as safety is a core value of our corporation, so is environmental compliance. We take our environmental compliance very seriously. We have been and will continue to be good environmental citizens. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'd like to defer the rest of the testimony to Chrissy Ivanovich.
Thank you. Proceed.
Mr. Chair and members, good morning. Thank you for the time today to hear from me. My name is Chrissy Ivanovich. I'm the Director of Environmental for Minnesota Ore Operations. That's the Mintec and Keetac facilities. So I'm responsible for the environmental compliance and permitting at those facilities. I worked for U.S. Steel for 18 years after I graduated from Virginia High School and then received my master's degree in environmental health and safety from the University of Minnesota Duluth. Currently live in Mountain Iron with my husband and my 3 children, and I'm proud to be a third-generation mining employee. In my role as environmental director, I've been working on issues related to the MPCA sulfate wild rice standard for several years. As you've heard from others today and previously, modern science clearly shows that sulfate is not toxic to wild rice. Once that was proven, MPCA should have repealed the existing standard and then moved on to other rulemaking projects. Instead, a policy decision was made to continue looking for a sulfate problem that doesn't exist. U.S. Steel supports repeal of the existing water quality standard for wild rice for several important reasons. 1, Minnesota should not have in its rules a water quality standard that is clearly not based on science. 2, until the standard is repealed, we are under a constant threat of MPCA or a third party attempting to require compliance with it. 3, compliance could cost hundreds of millions of dollars to install and operate wastewater treatment, even though the science shows that this compliance would not result in a benefit to the wild rice. And 4, there is no proven relationship between the standard and a benefit to the rice. As you've heard from others today, MPCA started this rulemaking process in 2010, and after 8 years, nothing has changed. What we have seen is that the administrative process to eliminate the standard doesn't work. That's why we support action by the legislature and by the governor. We are committed to making capital improvements in our facilities, as you've heard from Larry today, and we've spent the $100 million over the past 10 years. But we need to prove that what we're doing is what we need to be doing and that we're spending our money where benefits will be clearly shown. Installing treatment would substantially increase our energy usage and require landfilling tons of solid waste removed from the process. Neither of those are environmentally beneficial. It's time to take action on the existing standard and move on to projects with a proven benefit. Therefore, U.S. Steel supports the repeal of the existing 10 milligram per liter standard, as it's not supported by laboratory science or by field data. A focus on restoration projects in specific water bodies would have much more of an impact than this standard. Thank you again for the time to hear from me today.
Thank you, both of you. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Next, Anya Eidiger and Rob Baranek. Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you identify yourselves for the record, who you represent, and proceed with your testimony?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Anya Ediger, and I serve as Manager of Government Relations for Cleveland Cliffs. I am joined today by my colleague Rob Baranek, Manager of Environmental Water Planning and Programs for Cliffs. By way of background, Cleveland Cliffs operates 3 iron ore mines in northeast Minnesota: Hibbing Taconite, United Taconite, and North Shore Mining. These 3 operations can collectively produce over 19 million tons of iron ore per year, employ over 1,700 individuals, and have an annual economic impact greater than $960 million. We are here to testify in support of House File 3280, which provides regulatory certainty on the sulfate wild rice water quality standard, and is needed because the effort to revise this rule has failed to take into account important scientific research and key considerations of the Clean Water Act. I will turn it over to Rob, who is responsible for regulatory planning, permitting, and compliance related to water at Cliffs iron mining facilities, so he can speak to the scientific basis of Cliffs' concerns with the rulemaking.
Thank you, Anya.
Proceed.
Thank you, members. I've served as Cliffs representative on the Wild Rice Advisory Committee since 2014, and through the stakeholder and rulemaking process, have applied Cliffs' proactive regulatory approach by sharing constructive feedback and advocating for science-based outcome. First, it's my opinion that the best available science does not support keeping the 10 milligram per liter standard or promulgating the draft equation as proposed by the MPCA. The MPCA, as well as other scientists, have determined the current 10 milligram per liter standard is obsolete. The Minnesota legislature recognized the standard was outdated when it appropriated $1.5 million for wild rice research in 2011. That fact was confirmed when the PCA initiated research and privately funded studies showed that sulfate is not directly toxic to wild rice at 10 milligrams per liter or at higher levels commonly found in Minnesota. This research led to the PCA to propose repealing the 10 milligram per liter standard and replacing it through rulemaking. Cliffs submitted comments in agreement with the PCA removing the 10 milligram per liter standard and that it was reasonably and scientifically justified. However, we remain concerned that the high error rate of the proposed PCA equation to replace the standard, which predicts the wrong outcome 1 in 5 times when field data is applied, is outdated, or not scientifically supported. Cliffs and other regulated entities sought to provide constructive feedback by advocating for adjustments that would have reduced the high error rate of the proposed equation. Nevertheless, these concerns have not yet been addressed through the current proposed rulemaking. In the most recent major milestone of the rulemaking process, the administrative law judge rejected the PCA proposal and supported maintaining the obsolete 10 milligram per liter standard based on legal interpretations that are not aligned with the Clean Water Act. Finally, the current approach to regulating waters in which wild rice grows fails to account for the numerous factors that may very well exert greater control on its growth than sulfate chemistry. These factors include fluctuating water levels, shoreland development, competitive plants, and elevated nutrient levels. In summary, we are nearing the end of a rulemaking process that does not incorporate the best available science, will not protect wild rice, and has been further complicated by an improper ruling by the administrative law judge. It's for these reasons that Cliffs supports House File 3280. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for the testifiers? Excuse me. Thank you. Okay, next we got MPCA down here, Adonis Neblet. And then after that, we'll have Catherine Hoffman. Welcome. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Adonis Neblet. I'm General Counsel at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Currently, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is in the midst of an administrative process before the Office of Administrative Hearing regarding the wild rice rulemaking. As a consequence, we are working through that process with the ALJ, the statutory process that you all have provided, and we have no specific comment regarding the proposed legislation.
Questions? Okay, thank you. And then after this, we'll have Sharon Day. Identify yourself for the record and who you represent, and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Hoffman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, or MCEA. MCEA is a public interest environmental law and science organization. We're headquartered here in St. Paul, and we've been involved in the disputes underlying this legislation for many years. MCEA opposes this bill because it usurps the role of state agencies to enforce our laws, and it interferes with an ongoing administrative process. This bill is essentially a wish list granted to industry. It obliterates the MPCA's authority to protect any wild rice growing anywhere, except for paddy rice that doesn't really need protection, from the deleterious impacts of sulfate. We oppose the bill for two reasons. First, it does not create the regulatory certainty that it purports to create. Under federal law, the existing state water quality standard cannot simply be abandoned. There's a process under federal law for repealing or revising water quality standards, and this bill doesn't follow it. Real regulatory certainty would involve accepting that wild rice deserves protection and figuring out better and cheaper cleanup techniques and ways to pay for that treatment. Second, although the bill promises to protect and preserve wild rice in Section 2, the operative provisions do the opposite, stripping any protection for wild rice away in state law while wasting the public resources that have already been put into this work. To expand on my first point, this bill is being presented to the committee as a path to regulatory certainty, but it won't create certainty. Interrupting the rulemaking that's ongoing will only lead to chaos because the legislature cannot undo a water quality standard that has already been approved by US EPA unless it substitutes another valid water quality standard that is at least as protective, which is what the MPCA is attempting to do. All this bill does is gut the existing standard and waste the millions of dollars of public money that resulted in the science-based standard. And I would note that a lot of testifiers here today have brought up parts of the ALJ decision. And the ALJ did have a lot of concerns about the PCA rulemaking, but one of them was not the science-based nature of the standard. The ALJ did conclude that the standard that PCA was approving was valid and based on strong science. Now the EPA, even our diminished EPA under President Trump, isn't going to approve such an obvious undoing of a protective water quality standard with no replacement. There's already a petition pending at the EPA because of the MPCA's failure to enforce the existing 10 standard that's on the books. So the only certainty associated with this bill is that it will bring on litigation. Real regulatory certainty would occur if the state could help pay for the treatment at these facilities that need treatment but can't afford it. Work that's already underway at the Legislative Water Commission and that my organization supports and has participated in. Real regulatory certainty would occur if the legislature would continue funding the scientific studies that help develop a standard and develop less expensive treatment. My second point is that the bill contains language that suggests that the legislature is intending to preserve wild rice as a protected use of water, but it actually does the opposite. Make no mistake, this bill guts the MPCA's ability to put effluent limits in any permit for any water, except to protect commercially grown wild rice. Representative Lueck suggested that it substituted a narrative standard for a numeric standard. But the only way to enforce a narrative standard is by translating it into a numeric standard. Otherwise, you can't put it into anybody's permit and say, here's the amount of this pollutant that you're allowed to discharge. Here's your limit. If the MPCA is forbidden from doing so, it cannot be enforced. Let me say that again. If you cannot translate a narrative standard into a numeric standard, the water quality standard cannot be enforced. Section 5 of this bill takes away the MPCA's authority to apply the water quality standard for wild rice waters nullified by this act. That's the language, which it turns out are all waters except for paddy rice. Section 6 says that the MPCA cannot use the science-based studies to establish a numeric limit for sulfate in a permit for a person discharging to the exceptional listed WR waters, which means that MPCA has no way to enforce the sulfate limits in the few waters that the legislation leaves as subject to the standard. And Section 7 prohibits MPCA from applying the existing 10 standard in waters classified for agricultural use until someone requests an appropriation involving paddy rice. By the end of this bill, there is no wild rice that remains protected. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views with the committee this morning, Mr. Chairman. This concludes my testimony.
Thank you. Representative Wagenius. Oh, sorry, Representative Hanson was on the list first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Hoffman, I'm looking at Section 2 of the bill, and I got my highlighter out and looking at the legislature finds, the legislature further finds, the legislature also finds, the legislature further finds, the legislature also finds, the legislature also finds, the legislature further finds, the legislature also finds, and the legislature finds. And I haven't found that we've been able to find anything in the legislature, particularly compromise or solutions to issues. Section 2 seems to be a legal dream of having set up for further litigation. And we could debate the merits of Section 3, 4, 5, et cetera. But I think the legislature has moved away from findings over the last many years because of they seem to be purpose statements or political statements rather than actual findings. How do we put in science findings? How do we say we want to find the science that finds our way out of these problems rather than the legislature finding this or finding that? I think what I've heard over the debate for years has been let the process work and let the science drive the decision. So I'd like to find the science findings, but I'd like you as in your legal background, what's the purpose for findings, legislative findings?
Ms. Hoffman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hanson, thank you for that question. You know, the legal import of legislative findings is very little. They're not binding on a court. Courts will occasionally turn to them to look for legislative intent, but they really don't have any force of law in this context. You know, respectfully, I would suggest that the legislature is not a good forum for doing scientific work, and that the legislature is not the place where we should be doing scientific findings at all. That's why the legislature delegates many of the specifics of enforcing things like water quality standards to an agency, because they're much better suited. This rulemaking process that PCA has been through and is still in, it's not perfect. I mean, that much is clear. And there's some changes that are going to happen in order for it to move forward. And obviously there are no easy answers here. If there were, then we would have come up with them a long time ago. But sometimes change is painful and hard, and that's not really a reason to short circuit a process that's ongoing, particularly to substitute the judgment of a body that's really not in a good position to assess the science around a particular issue.
Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your testimony, I heard something about there may be better ways to treat and that we should be thinking about how we would help pay for that treatment. Could you just expand on what you were saying there?
Ms. Hoffman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wagenius, thank you. You know, we've heard a lot today from the challenges of paying for the potential treatment at various facilities around the state. These are valid concerns, and we are not dismissive of that at all at MCEA. But our preference would be instead to invest in publicly supported research, and even low-interest loans, other options for these facilities to try to find a way to pay for some of this treatment or to make it cheaper, as opposed to simply saying, well, it's expensive, we shouldn't protect our environment. To be totally honest, that was the situation that we had prior to the passage of the Clean Water Act. You know, we had a situation where our water quality standards, this is the first version of the Clean Water Act. It was technology. It was a technology-based standard. Whatever the industry can do, that's the water quality standard. And then the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. That was not a successful strategy. The Clean Water Act has a long history of being technology forcing. That means that we will sometimes require industries to meet a standard that they don't at the time have a great way of doing. And then we have provisions in the law, such as variances, that allow them to make those investments and find a way to do that over time. And we're not opposed to public financing to move towards those options. But to simply say that something's expensive and therefore we cannot protect the natural resources, the clean water, and our public health, you know, is a road that I don't believe that most Minnesotans would want to go down.
Representative Wagenius.
Yes, thank you. And just following up on the portion about having science help us find new strategies, how do you think we should go about that?
Ms. Hoffman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wagenius, so one example that I'm aware of is there's been some funding to the NRI, which is part of UMD. It's Natural Resources, other R word, Institute. I always forget their second R word. And this is funding to work on using bacteria to reduce sulfate in a way that is cost effective. And there's been some public financing for that, and it seems like a potentially promising way forward. So that's a good example of the kinds of research and role that the state could play in moving forward towards a solution on sulfate.
Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Hoffman, I'll look forward to working with you on that. We've funded some research and have asked the NRI to actually give us the dollar amount in what they would estimate to complete that previous to this bill even being drafted, because we are proud of that. There is a project in my district that seems to be working not only on sulfate, but phosphate as well. And I think it's our responsibility to provide the next generation with the technologies to do things just a little bit better than we did, and make sure that we're following in suit to our parents and grandparents making those investments, so we could be here today.
Thank you. Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chair, one of the reasons I brought that up, and for Representative Metza too, the LCCMR has funded a number of projects at the University of Minnesota here in a civil engineering department. We have some absolutely outstanding experts in doing wastewater treatment. I mean, nationally known, cutting edge, and so I am wondering why we are not appropriating money to both NRI and the U here to help us with some of these strategies going forward. So that's, and I'm wondering why that's not part and parcel of what we're talking about.
Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hoffman, for your testimony. Talked a lot about the MPCA and their duties and all that. We just heard a report last week or 2 weeks ago on the MPCA. So you're supportive of the MPCA, but are you supportive of their non-compliance on reporting? Because it seems like if they can't even get their reporting done, is this an adequate process that they're going through?
Ms. Hoffman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Eklund, and I apologize, I'm not exactly sure what reporting you're referring to. Are you referring to the impaired waters, or what reporting is that?
Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reporting that they have to do to the Department of Administration, they were pretty much in non-compliance on doing that, so.
Ms. Hoffman.
Mr. Chair, Representative Eklund, I don't have a lot of information about that, but of course, we're a law-based organization, so if MPCA is in violation of the law and should be reporting, we would agree that they should as well.
I'm sure they'll be glad to hear that. Ms. Hoffman, what is the current sulfate standard?
Mr. Chair, 10 milligrams per liter for wild rice waters.
And how many permits does MPCA have for discharge facilities around the state, municipal and industrial?
Mr. Chair, how many permits total?
Yep.
I don't know.
Okay. Do you know of any of the permits that have the 10 milligrams per liter written into their permit?
Mr. Chair, I'm aware of one, the Keetac facility owned by U.S. Steel.
Okay. Thank you. Members, there's thousands, probably. Any other questions? Okay, next, Sharon Day, and then Don Arnosti. I've been informed that Tom Rukavina is on his way down, so I'm not sure if, no, I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
You gotta go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Welcome.
My name is Sharon Day, and I'm an enrolled member of the Boys Fort Band of Ojibwe. The place, Net Lake is on our reservation and has the best wild rice in the world, grows on our lake. I also am the tribal representative for the Clean Water Council. 40% of our waters are impaired within the state of Minnesota. And the best way to keep waters clean is to not make them dirty in the first place, right? Not to put chemicals into them and sulfate in them in the first place, because it's certainly harder to clean up something than it is to keep it clean in the first place. When we say that wild rice is sacred to Ojibwe and also to the Dakota people, sacred means sacred. Sacred means that's something that you protect. And this bill that's proposed does nothing to protect. In fact, I see this bill to nullify the current standards as an attack on Ojibwe people. How much can you do to us? Tribal governments have the right to set their own water quality standards, and they do. The best thing that you could do with this money that you're going to appropriate, whether it's $50,000 or $500,000, would be to study how you can improve the economy on the Iron Range, where I grew up, in ways that will not continue to impair our waterways. And protect that which is most sacred to the Ojibwe people. Wild rice, monoman, makes us, it's a part of our culture. It is indeed sacred to us. So I just urge you to allow the process to continue that's already been in place, the process that hundreds of people have spoken to already, and protect our waterways. Miigwech. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions? Representative Beckerpin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and miigwech, Ms. Day, for being here today and speaking. It's important that we hear from some Native testifiers as well. So there was one of the earlier testifiers talked about how mining's been going on in northern Minnesota for over 130 years. How long have our people been harvesting wild rice in northern Minnesota?
Ms. Day.
Yes, for at least 500 years, because that's how long we've been here. We came to this area as a result of prophecies prior to European contact, and we were instructed to move west until we came to a place where food grows on the water, and that food, of course, is wild rice. And just one other thing about Boyce Fort and Net Lake. And my small little reservation in northern Minnesota has protected the wild rice since they came there. We've never allowed motorized boats on our lake, and so the rice is significantly different than rice from any other part of the state of Minnesota. And when I was a kid growing up, wild rice was not only was a sacred food to us, but it was also determined whether you might own a car that year. It depended upon the harvest and the natural flow of whether the water was high or whether it was low, whether there were storms or not. And everybody harvested wild rice, and everybody would come home, if they had left the reservation, would come home to harvest wild rice. So we've protected, if my little reservation can protect its lake, when they had to dredge the river coming in, Lost River and Net River going out, they found solar equipment to dredge it. So even then, they did it in a way that was protective of the water. And if my reservation can do that, surely the state of Minnesota can do a better job.
Representative Beckerpin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you for that testimony. There have been a lot of comments about how we're the only state with a wild rice standard, but I think your testimony really explains, even begins to explain why that is. Northern Minnesota is a truly unique place and unique ecosystem, unique history as far as wild rice. And Mr. Chair, if you'll allow it, I brought a bag of it's Leech Lake area wild rice, not Net Lake wild rice, and then cultivated rice, which I don't think we should even call wild rice. Cultivated wild rice doesn't make any sense. And this was grown in California, and this is what's sold in a grocery store, and might be what some of you folks, when you think of wild rice, you think it's this gross stuff here that you probably paid way too much for. So I just wanted to pass it around so folks can kind of see the difference in what we're talking about as far as the unique aspects of wild rice in our state. And I think there's been a lot of, kind of lip service paid here to the importance of wild rice, without that true understanding of the impacts of wild rice for our communities in northern Minnesota. And let's be clear, our native residents of northern Minnesota are Minnesotans too. And so I think that we certainly deserve a voice here. And you're the only native testifier we've had, and I think that's really important, and I thank you for being here. Representative Bliss actually represents an area of the state where really the wild rice stronghold of the state is located in the Leech Lake area. And Representative Bliss, I don't know if you're willing to speak to, how many, or have you talked to the Ojibwe folks in your district, and what do they think of this bill?
Representative Bliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I specifically have not spoken to the native residents up there specifically to this bill. I have spoken to my neighbors and friends, however, that have harvested wild rice this year, and they told me it was a bumper crop, and it was a real good year for wild rice, so.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would encourage all of our representatives who represent Native people here at the legislature to speak to them directly, because you represent them too. And just so folks understand, the Leech Lake, and that's only one of the bands, there's over 10,000 enrolled members, and it's over $1 million a year to that local economy comes from wild rice. From our natural wild rice harvesting. And, you guys want to talk about disparities and jobs and families in rural Minnesota. The economics of harvesting wild rice are incredibly important to one of the most impoverished areas in our state. And so, we can't forget that piece of this discussion as well, because over $1 million a year going into that local economy. That's not even counting Net Lake. I'm just talking about Leech Lake. I'm not including Boys Fort and White Earth and Fond du Lac and the other tribes. So I think we really have to be better at reaching out to folks and make sure that we're understanding the big picture and not just the mining industry side of things. There's lots of people in northern Minnesota that sometimes we forget. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Arnosky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the
Thank you, Ms. Gay.
committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here. My name is Don Arnosky. I'm the Conservation Director for the Isaac Walton League, which is an organization made up of people who love the outdoors, hunting, fishing, and other forms of outdoor recreation, as well as make their living from it. Our current president is a retired DNR forester. I'm here to try to knit together maybe something that might be common ground. I think we've been on a collision course on this issue for almost a decade now. And I'm going to try to put some pieces together where I think maybe we could move forward. I'd like to support the A5 amendment, not the bill, but the A5 amendment I think is a good step forward. And as noted in the committee testimony, additional money is needed to make that real. I think there's three other key points that really people are in this room and around the state of Minnesota all agree on. We do want to protect wild rice. We want to protect it for the reasons that Ms. Day talked about in terms of the cultural significance and importance to some of our Minnesotans and to their local economy, as well as their own spiritual practice and sustenance. I'd like to point out that wildlife as well depends on wild rice. For example, canvasback ducks in particular, a very high percentage of their diet during August is made up of wild rice. Canvasback duck is known as the flying caviar. It's the best tasting duck. Well, I wonder why. It's just had a crop full of wild rice for the last month when people harvest it. I think everybody in this room and in the state of Minnesota wants to keep our clean water. In northeastern Minnesota, we have cleaner water than we have in most of the rest of the state. And it's important that as we live our lives and we conduct our economic activities that we maintain that clean water. And I think people do agree on that. I think there was some interesting discussion a little bit earlier in this hearing concerning, can't we do better than reverse osmosis technology? And by better, I mean economically better, because reverse osmosis technology works technically, but it's very expensive, and it's not economically affordable in the long run to be used widespread. So we are the state of Minnesota. The current taconite industry was created out of research done at the University of Minnesota because the iron mining industry was dying in the 1950s because natural iron ore was running out. We created that industry out of research and then turned it loose to provide the vital materials that our nation needs over the last 50 or 60 years. we can do the same thing, I believe, if we take a look at the problem of sulfate pollution. Sulfate is a problem for wild rice. Many of the testifiers were very careful in their testimony, and what the most recent research has shown is that it is not the sulfate directly that is a problem, but rather its conversion in organic settings into sulfide. But if you put the precursor pollutant into the water, you will wind up with the same result. So rather than argue over technical nuances like that, why doesn't this committee, as an environmental finance committee, propose significant appropriations to our research institutions, to our corporations? I, for one, would love to see the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce step forward with some of their outstanding members, such as 3M and Ecolab, that already work in this space, that already work in clean water. They are globally significant businesses with a cutting-edge research. Why don't we, instead of working to undermine environmental protection, it would be great to have the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce step forward with their business expertise and say, we're here to partner with our research institutions like the NRI, like the University of Minnesota, and like many other excellent research facilities we have that are both public and private. And let's come up with more cost-effective ways to make sure that sulfate does not get into our water in excess amounts that does harm the environment. We can have clean water, we must have clean water, and we must have it in a way that is affordable within our current economic and business approach. I urge you to take that approach instead, and maybe 5 years from now, we've already spent almost a decade kind of walking two different paths on this approach. Maybe 5 or 10 years from now, we will have not only something that will protect Minnesota's water, but a technology that we can export to the rest of the globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you. Representative Lueck, I'm about to renew my motion to re-refer House File 3280 to GovOps. Do you have any closing comments?
No, sir, other than I think this is a great step forward to really do the things we need to do to protect wild rice.
Thank you. Representative Metsa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we heard a lot of important points from a diverse group of people here, and I really feel like we're on the same page in terms of making the investments that need to be made so the next generation has the tools to do things better. And I know it's not known widely, but we have made those investments many years previous to this, just not at the dollar amounts that provide adequate timeliness in getting it done. I'll be committed to putting together a package and working with the stakeholders this session, put our money where our mouth is in moving that ball forward.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. As we're moving toward problem solving, not which is what we're supposed to be doing here, I'd make a couple of suggestions. On 1.16 of your amendment, I would suggest that you actually include some pilot projects here for restoration activities and monitor their effectiveness, and do that as part of your recommendations. So we're not in a three-stage process, we're in a two-stage process. A three-stage process would be do some recommendations, do some pilots, then do some restoration. You can do the first two together.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Representative Lueck.
Excellent point. And in 2008, we truly started down exactly that road. Unfortunately, we didn't get very far down that road. There are a lot of things that are going on. This is the base plate to start from. Those very things you're talking about are outlined in this study that's frankly sat too long in a desk drawer someplace. So that's one of the reasons why we need to get this group together. Here's the base plate. I mean, my goodness, there was a huge amount of work done here that outlined a global problem, and if you go down and look at the 6 recommendations, we just did a few things there, and then we got sidetracked on something else. So it's right here, Representative Wagenius. But we just need to get the train going in the right track here.
Representative Wagenius.
Well, keeping the train going in the right track, I think, would also include a significant amount of money for research on wastewater treatment, and we should be doing that now, not waiting again. So I would like to see an outcome of those kinds of things rather than trying to say we have no problem. But for you, Mr. Chairman, I am looking at line 4.28, or maybe it's of the bill, and the application of the water quality standards for irrigation. It says, including water used for the production of wild rice. So the way this is written, it applies to all agriculture, and this bill does need to go to the Committee on Agriculture. I don't know whether it goes there before it goes to GovOps. I would think that that would be the appropriate place.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I think I'm going to renew my motion to set, oh, I'm sorry, Representative Hansen. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just one more technical correction, and I hope that the authors, and it's really on the amendment, Representative Metz's amendment, and maybe Ms. Taylor, as it moves into the next stop. I think there are statutory definitions of wild rice and cultivated wild rice, and maybe referencing those differences in the language, because I'm not sure if we have actual natural wild rice as a statutory definition. So just if there could be some continuity with existing law in terms of definitions as it moves forward, I think that would be helpful.
So noted to the authors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's interesting that that's a element of one of the recommendations that sat in the drawer, was to clarify all of our language. So again, it's almost all the work is done here. We just need to pick it up, get some people to relook at this. It's been sitting in a drawer for 10 years and move on with it. But you're exactly right, Representative Hansen. We figured that out 10 years ago, that we needed to clarify a whole lot of things on how we protect wild rice.
Representative Beckerfin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope Representative Lueck and Representative Metza that as we work on improving this bill and trying to actually get to a place where we're protecting wild rice, that we also make sure we're addressing the issue of genetically modified wild rice, and making sure that, you know, if we set out those definitions of what rice we're talking about, that we make sure that we're talking about the real deal and not the genetically modified rice that is really can be a threat to the real stuff. So thanks.
Mr. Chair, this sounded like a broken record. It's right here in one of the recommendations that we started down the road on 10 years ago, and we probably got some work there on definitions. But again, we got the boilerplate here. We just need to pick it back out and get busy on it.
Representative Metza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to say that we heard those same concerns when I referenced Representative Eklund and I's meeting with the tribal governments. And it is my belief that if seed spreads by chance from a genetically modified origin and ends up in a natural setting, that should be the property of the state of Minnesota.
Representative Beckerfin.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just want to note for the record that Representative Metza and Representative Lueck and I all apparently agree on this one thing. So thank you.
I'm sure it's a lot more than that. Okay.
Hopefully wild hockey as well.
Blaze pink. Okay, so with that, I will renew my motion to re-refer House File 3280 to the Committee on Government Operations. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
The motion prevails. Bill is on to GovOps. Anything for the benefit of the group members? Thank you. Thank you, testifiers. Thank you. Appreciate it. With that, we're adjourned.